Michael, Alyssa, whichever one of you want to jump in, we're good to
Great.
go.
Thanks so much. Happy Wednesday, everyone. Thanks for hosting us again today. We are going to talk about partnering with persons with lived experience and expertise of homelessness. So if we go to the next slide, we will do some introductions in the chat. So if you want to add in your name, organization, entity that you are representing today, area of Alaska you live in, pronouns, and any other identities you'd like to share, that would be great. And the question of the day is, if you are not at work right now, what would you be doing instead? I think based on what's happening in my background, I would be chasing down little humans and figuring out what's going on. That's what I would be doing. And while y'all are doing that in the chat, I'm realizing that we don't have a slide to introduce ourselves, and we do have a wonderful colleague with us today. Sorry. So I'm gonna introduce myself real quickly, and then Michael, and then hand it over to Ziggy. So my name is Alyssa Parrish, pronouns are she, her, and I'm with ICF. I'm also Asian, so I'll kick it over to Michael.
Yeah, and I'm Michael. Use he, him pronouns. I'm white, also.
Hi, my name is Ziggy. My pronouns are them and theirs. I also work at ICF, and I am Black. Yes. Are we answering the question of the day? Nah, right?
I think you should. If you were not here right now, Ziggy, what would you be doing instead?
If I was not here right now, I would be reluctantly helping my 6-year-old with homework that he's throwing a fit about doing. So I opted right out of that.
Washing dishes, so, maybe I'll take the presentation today.
All right, thanks folks for adding your interest in the chat. For the sake of time, we do have quite a bit of content today. We'd like to also have some discussion, so we can go on to the next slide and go through our group agreements. So these are the similar ones that we've had throughout the duration of our time with you. So I'll just read through them quickly. Be present, listen actively, and use I statements. Participate to the fullest of your ability. Our collective growth depends on the inclusion of every individual voice. The goal is not to agree, but rather to gain a deeper understanding. Choose courage and bravery over comfort. Challenge the way that we have historically responded to homelessness, and see each of us and our collective growth as part of the solution. So if we go to the next slide, what we're going to be talking about today is the authentic partnership with people with lived experience and expertise of homelessness. And we understand that communities are in very different places in implementing this, and especially in a geography of your size and having kind of local, regional hubs, if you will, that authentic partnership with people with lived experience looks different in a balanced state than in a very tight, small, geographically based COC. So we are going to talk through some practical ways to engage and partner with people with lived experience and expertise for homelessness today. I will also mention that we are trying to fit 12 weeks worth of content into an hour-long conversation today with you all. So like I said, the slides that we will give you have a lot of content, and we don't expect that this will cover everything. This is really the beginning of the conversation. As with most of the conversations that we've had with you over the last 5 weeks, this is the beginning, absolutely not the end. So we're actually going to start out with a discussion, and the question is really, I think that we've heard over time, over the last several weeks, that there are things that you'd like to do, but there are barriers to that. So we wanted to specifically ask about the barriers that exist or potentially exist to this authentic partnership, this idea of authentic partnership with people with lived experience and expertise of homelessness. So we're really focused on that third question there on this slide. So feel free to pop into the chat, come off mute and talk with us, whatever is most comfortable for you. I'm not seeing any comments come in through the chat. Sorry. John, do you think you could build on that comment a little bit more around clients are embarrassed to ask for assistance? How is that related to authentically partnering with people with lived experience and expertise in homelessness?
Sure, I'll comment on it. This is not everybody, but these are our clients that normally don't ask for assistance and they're embarrassed when they finally have to. And if we want to get any more feedback from them, they're really reluctant. You know, if we want to get a testimonial or any kind of information as possible, it's very brief because they don't want to be in the office. They don't want to be, answering the questions they have to answer. They want to get in and get out because they're embarrassed about even having to ask for assistance. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but. So feedback is not generally easy to get from them in that situation.
That's helpful. Thank you for expanding upon that. I'm curious if other folks have felt that or experienced that or something different.
Thanks for being willing to speak up, John. Anyone else have any comments? How does your organization partner with those with lived experience?
I put this in the chat.
Did we lose Jordan?
We must have. I thought that I lost audio, so I was about ready to call in. So I appreciate that you said something, Helen.
They did, but they just rejoined.
Yeah, Jordan's here.
That's the second time I've been kicked off. I don't know what's going on. Yeah, so we work with young people through our Little Youth Action Board, but mostly it's more just organically talking to them. And I think, what John was saying about adults maybe not wanting to give feedback. I don't know if that was adult specific, John, but I feel like our young people tell us all the time what they want and don't want. And so it's super helpful and it really informs everything we do. We also give them, in our shelter programming, we give them a confidential exit survey that they fill out on their own time and leave with us, and they don't have to put their name on it or anything. And we've gotten some valuable feedback in that way too. And it is anonymous. So yeah, I mean, I think we spend a lot of time just chatting with them about what's working for them, what doesn't work. And I think it's been making it feel pretty organic really seems to help a lot. And then the Youth Action Board, we do when those meetings happen, the youth are paid for their time too. So
Thanks, Jordan. That's super helpful. And we will actually talk a little bit or touch on compensation a little bit later too.
we do also have, I forgot to say this, but we do also have staff with lived experience, which is really helpful too.
Awesome.
Some of the best programs that I think I've seen throughout the state are ones that eventually they end up hiring previous clients. So there are peers that are helping to do the work, and make decisions about the work. And there are a few programs that we've seen that have been able to do that.
That's great. Those are some great initial steps to doing this.
We recently had a guest at Family Promise here in Juneau who was really dissatisfied with our services, in particular, his relationship with the case manager, who happened to be me. And it was taken to our executive director, and he really wanted to give feedback about his experience. And I think that we did a wonderful job. It was taken to Bailey Gent, our executive director, met with him. And then the board was called, and the board chair, and they shared with him a grievance policy, and really showed and listened to him, that they were attentive in hearing his feedback. So it was really healthy, because it can be positive and not always positive. And everyone was very respectful to him.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing some of those pieces of feedback. We're going to go on to the next slide and just center ourselves. Sorry, the next slide, because those are some more discussion questions that you all can take back to your community too, as you have these conversations, kind of following up. Again, this is the beginning, not the end. So just a little bit of centering around why we are focused on this today is just acknowledging and saying out loud that the current homeless response system broadly, we're not talking about Alaska's specifically, we're talking about homeless response systems across the country, have mostly been established and led by white leadership. And we also recognize there's data that backs this up, that Black, Indigenous, and other people of color are the most impacted by homelessness in every single COC, every single state, every single community across the country. The disparities that exist within those communities vary and look different across the communities, but there are racial disparities in every single homeless response system across the country. There's this quote, "Those closest to the problem are closest to the solution, but furthest from the resources and the power." And that's kind of why we talked through power mapping last week. I also use the nothing about us without us, but I add nothing about us or for us without us, because I think it's really important to empower folks to have decisions about what is not done about them, not done in relation to them, but done for them. It has to be done with them. And really nothing has ever succeeded without the full engagement and leadership. So not just, eliciting feedback from folks experiencing with lived experience and expertise of homelessness, but also having them involved in leadership roles in decision-making processes. So making sure that they are closest to the decision-making and the power as well, and hold that power. So we do have a slide on here about positional and grassroots leadership, but I'm actually going to skip it and go on to the next slide. Again, there's a lot of content in these slides today, and we have a limited period of time. So I'm going to kick it over to Ziggy to talk through language and go through our next bit of content.
Cool. I distract myself on camera, so if you guys are sad about it, then I'll come look at you, but I'm going to go back and forth, and we're going to work with that. So language matters. So the way that you talk about people, lived experience people, but people as a whole matters. Everyone wants to be addressed as a person and feel like they're equal and worthy and valued, because especially in this space and in this context, they are. So as opposed to homeless person experiencing homelessness, because homelessness is an experience, but it is not something that makes you the person that you are. It's an experience that you go through. Lived experience, meaning that you have this lived experience, you have experienced homelessness, you've experienced this thing that makes you valuable for this conversation. But that your lived experience is something that you can only gain through living the situation, versus lived expertise, where now that I have had this lived experience, I possess expertise about a subject that others without said experience probably don't have. And if they do, their level of expertise is in a different context. So when you have lived experience, You might have an experience of something, but you might not have expertise about all the things. Whereas because I've experienced certain things through navigating my lived experience, oh, I should have said that. I'm a person with lived experience. Hi, friends. But also, when not having lived experience, after a minute, when you've learned how to wield that, it then becomes something that you have expertise in, whether it's expertise of your system as it exists in Alaska, or expertise within other things that also affect your system as a whole. I'm gonna go to the next slide. I talk kind of fast, and if you need me to slow down, throw emojis or something, and I'll see them, or someone else will tell me to slow down, because I trust y'all judgment. Ensuring meaningful engagement. You want to think about what engages you in your work, but you also want to make sure that the work that you're doing isn't just someone giving input. When you're making sure something is meaningful and impactful, the relationships that you're building, the conversations you're having, the work that you're doing together, both with a person or with a system, or to change a system as a whole, that's something that's two ways. When you're making something that is a meaningful engagement, everyone feels involved in the process. Everyone is in part of the thing, meaning that the work that is happening, the things that are moving forward, cannot move forward without it being engaging to both people. Otherwise, that is not a meaningful engagement. There's a difference between having an interaction versus having long-term engagement that is like collectively building, and that's always what you're going to go for. When you're getting something that is feedback, that can be something that's one time versus a long-term engagement, something that you're building together. You're always working for deeper engagement, especially when it comes to decision making, because everyone wants to hear that the feedback they gave had meaning, had value, that the thing that they commented on was something that was impactful. That, hey, I had a grievance about this thing and somebody listened to me. Hey, you asked for my feedback and then this changed for the better. Everyone wants to know that the words that they're saying aren't falling upon deaf ears, because otherwise you don't end up getting feedback. People stop talking, people stop having complaints because they don't think it's going to go anywhere. You want to be mindful of tokenism and decorative engagement. That's giving a survey but not changing things based on the survey. That's asking questions that you don't intend to answer. It can sometimes look like a suggestion box, but nobody ever empties out the suggestion box to read the suggestions. There's a lot of ways to make meaningful engagement, but also making it something that's accessible. You also want to be aware that you don't only want to ask for feedback on things, that we require your feedback to move this work forward. Having a rolling door for feedback is one of the key ways to do that, and also making sure that people know what is changing based on the feedback as it's given. You want to center lived experience people within the work itself and the decision-making processes, because they're going to know what's working for them and what's working against them and how it's working. The only way to get feedback on something as it changes and as it works within a system is to get feedback from people that are affected by said system. Alyssa, is that cool? You want to add stuff? Okay. Next slide.
No,
please.
I would just say, yeah, I also love the way that you defined and explained decorative engagement, because the first time that I saw that term, I wasn't sure that I wholly understood what it meant. But then as we dug deeper, it totally explains what you're trying to illustrate in those terms. So appreciate that.
Vibes. I'm not calling on you to bully you. You're just on camera and I can see you.
You never bully me. It's fine.
All right, shifting power. So when you're working with people with lived experience, it means that when someone comes to you requesting services, requesting assistance, they already feel like they're at a disadvantage within this power system. When what you're doing to shift power means that you want to make sure that decision-making power, power to change the system, power that makes conversations move forward, is power that is shifted onto those with lived experience, power that is shifted onto those that now know what needs to change within a system to make it a better system. Because generally, people without lived experience, people doing the work, people doing good work, are people that may or may not have lived experience. So the way that they're going to look at a system is top down or from an outside in, meaning that there are some inner workings of things that you're just not going to understand if you haven't had to navigate it. And that's why you want to make sure that that all designs are co-created, that everyone shares decision-making abilities and powers, and that when you're making something, that there's accountability to the community, but also to people involved within the community. And you're thinking about how decisions are currently being made, if that is fair, if that is just, if that has the best intention of those involved at heart, and what you want to do to change that. There's a bunch of ways to expand on this, but this is one of those deeper dive conversations. So there's more slides on it, but we're gonna go to the next one for now. But if you have questions, we can double back to it later, maybe. All right. So earlier, you guys talked about how you think you're getting feedback from youth and young adults. So maybe that the lack of being able to say that they need help is coming from adults. This is one of those unique characteristics of engaging with youth and young adults. So as someone with lived experience as a youth and young adults, they need their own representation, but also their experience might be a lot different than older adults and families. Young adult homelessness is often seen as invisible homelessness because it looks different. It can be couch surfing. It can be, I can stay at this person's house this amount of days. I might be at a drop-in center this night, but as long as I get to school, I look relatively normal. It means that there's a lot of under the radar happening, but also youth and young adults are generally more vocal. And there's more points of if you're going to listen to this young person, it's different because you have schools that are saying things. You have libraries functioning as impromptu drop-in sites. You have healthcare providers saying, hey, we haven't seen this kid for a physical in a year. What is happening? A lot of things like that are things that make youth and young adult homelessness different. But also because of these stopgaps, it means that the engagement has to be different. They still need the same level of consideration, authentic engagement, and decision making because similar to that, the only way to know what youth and young adults need is to engage with the youth and young adults that are experiencing homelessness in those communities because it's different. And with I've worked in multiple communities, I've been a person in communities, and each community is different based on what they need, sometimes based on makeup, meaning that things that are going to work for me in Brooklyn, New York, because we have drop-ins all through the 5 boroughs, aren't going to work in upstate New York. They're not going to work in a rural place that doesn't have any centralized locations. It also means that authentic engagement is going to vary based on what engagement looks like at the moment. Meaning that if you're working in a rural area and you're a virtual meeting space, you need to make sure people have phones or that there is a physical location they can log into to have these conversations. Be it a partnership with a library or providing a device, because sometimes you don't have signal. You don't have devices. It might mean that the meeting that you've now had still needs to be translated via text message to say, here's the notes on what you missed. It means that you might have to make sure that communication, but also the way that you're reaching out to get young people involved might happen in a different way versus other locations because there's so many variables between how to keep youth and young adults engaged, but also how to make it approachable while you're engaging. Next slide, please. Honoring space for persons with lived experiences. So a lot of our meetings aren't always set up effectively to engage with people with lived experiences. So I've heard a lot, you probably said, these young people, they don't always show up, or it's hard to keep people engaged. It's hard to make sure that people with lived experience are engaged in the process, or they showed up for a while and then they didn't. When you're honoring a space for a lived experience individual, it means that you're finding a way to reach out to them, but you're also making sure that if there's something that you can do to make it an approachable space, that you're trying to do that. Sometimes it means meeting people where they're at. A lot of times there's space to have like rolling engagement, meaning that I'm honoring the space. Say that you have a committee of 15, but there's 5 that are consistent, but everyone else is able to participate online, or they're participating in virtual polls, or if you send out an email, people are responding to the email. Sometimes it's easy to say, oh, nobody's showing up. But especially for people navigating active homelessness, honoring space means realizing that sometimes they can't show up to that space, but you can make a space that can show up for them. You can make a space that is accessible for them, that A, meets the need, but also is approachable. And it sometimes requires a little bit of flexibility. But the difference between actively navigating crisis and honoring a space means that you have thought beyond the things that are directly placed in front of you to try and make it so that this is effective. We're aware that people navigating homelessness might not have access to some of the things to show up in a virtual meeting or to show up to a physical location, but sometimes that's something simple like a gas card. It also means that whether or not the space is made in the moment, once you get there, it means that you're working with them without judging them, without making them feel less than, for missing a meeting, for not being able to appear, for not being part of the conversation, or for magically reappearing, because that happens sometimes too, and making that okay, but also making sure that everyone's okay where they're at and seeing if you can make it easier for them to show up. Because generally people want to show up. There's just a barrier to participation, and some of doing this work is eliminating barriers. Next slide, please. We talked about this before, but structures and resources, meaning that sometimes you want to make sure everyone is paid the same way we are paid to do the work. We're paid to work with people experiencing homelessness. We're paid for our time here. They also deserve to be paid because the experiences and the expertise they have is expertise they gain through living something traumatic that can also inform our systems to make them better so that other people don't have the same experiences navigating said systems. It means that you're equipping them with technology, be it computers, Wi-Fi, cell phones, having accessible meetings. Sometimes that means online. Sometimes that means that you're now alternating meeting spaces. For a better example, sometimes you have meetings in a library versus at a drop-in center based on accessibility to proximity. It might mean that you have rolling meetings. Some groups have it where one meeting is virtual, the next week is in person. Things like that. Making sure that transportation, interpretations accessible to them, having meeting materials. Generally, if you have meeting materials, try to send them out ahead of time. That way people can read them ahead and just provide comments, but also leaving space to like go through it in the moment as needed. Onboarding, meaning that there needs to be a process for onboarding, even if it is rolling, so that people know what they're doing. It's really hard to do a job when you don't know what is expected of you, and this applies even for things like this. If you're going to onboard somebody, they want to know what they're doing, and having onboarding materials is important. And staffing support, but I think we have a slide on, so I'm going to talk about that when we get there. Next slide, please. Compensation. We talked about this a little bit too. Everyone deserves to be paid for their work and their time because the way that they got this expertise is through living through an experience. We are paying them for showing them the value of the work, the value of them as a person, but also paying them for helping us to do something that we all want to do, which is make the systems that we exist in, that we navigate better. Pay is usually one of the most controversial issues for communities to deal with, be it through lack of knowing how, lack of structure, or lack of flexibilities. And we're going to talk about some of that in a minute. Food is not payment. Pizza is not payment. Pizza is not payment. I've been to so many YAB meetings where pizza is the lure to attendance, but it's also the only method given. Pizza does not qualify as a form of payment, especially when you know people are navigating active homelessness and crisis. They need money to do things. Living wages is always what you want to go for. There is a living wage calculator online that I tend to use, and that tends to be my baseline for figuring out what should a wage be, because you want people to show up, and part of people showing up is paying them for the time and showing that they are as valued as you are in the space, because you need people with lived experience to do this work and to do it well. The only way to change a system to make one that is responsive and as adaptable as it needs to be is by having people with those experiences to say what needs to change, what needs to be adapted. And consultant rates is another way to figure out what that compensation should look like. I think next slide. Yeah. Oh wait, Alyssa, do you want to say stuff?
I don't think so, other than I would agree that this issue or the figuring this piece out is one of the most difficult pieces the communities navigate. And not necessarily because they disagree, right? I think everybody agrees that people should get paid for their experience and expertise. It's the how that often comes into play. So I think that there are things that we could talk through about that, you know, at a more local level if it's needed. So.
Yeah. Potential methods of payment. So if you're paying someone in a way that isn't accessible to them, you might as well have not paid them. Meaning that if you've given me money that I cannot use, you have not given me money. If you've given me a gift card for Target, you have given me a gift card for Target. That is not payment either. Stipends, meaning cash or checks. Gift cards. Visa gift cards qualify as payment because you can use them on whatever you want. Venmo and Cash App. There's other ways to do this. These are the most preferable, the most accessible, the most preferred, but you want to make sure that whatever method you're using is accessible for the people that you're using it with. And this might mean having a variety of these set up to be assessed by LibDex individuals. I don't do this often, but gift cards is there for us. The easiest example is if you're working with undocumented folks, gift cards are usually the most approachable. Because you can sign off on a form, be it initials or however, and they can still be paid for their time and tracked within a system without having to provide extra documentation, which is why gift cards are up there. So it's not the most commonplace, but it does have a function and a purpose for those that need it. Yeah, I think that's all I got for this. Make sure that when you're paying people, they can use the money that you're giving them.
So, reporting income is an important thing that comes up, when we think about, paying people with experience for their time. And obviously how it's reported is gonna depend on, how you make those payments. So there's a number of things that might come up. I am not a tax expert, so I'm not gonna try to give you tax advice here today. But just to point out a couple of things to be aware of, some of the things you might have to think about are, 1099s. That is the tax form that you typically have to prepare for like a consultant or a contractor, someone who's not an employee, but you're paying. There is a dollar amount threshold, which I am not going to quote here because we are not a tax professional, but there's a dollar amount threshold for 1099 reportable income. My advice would be, sorry, can you guys hear me okay?
Kinda. So I thought it was just me.
Okay, sorry. Give me a second. I can try to switch. Sorry, 1 second.
All right, is that any better?
So much
Yeah.
better.
Ah, perfect. Sorry about that. Zoom did not pick up on my right microphone. Okay, cool. Did you guys hear anything I was saying? Should I start over? Did you hear the 1099 part?
It sounded far. I couldn't really hear it. I'm sorry.
No problem. I'll start over. So, what I was saying is, income has to be reported. So that's something a lot of agencies are concerned about when they make payments. And these are just some of the things you see on the screen here that you want to take under consideration. I'm not giving tax advice because I'm not a tax professional. But just again, to note some things that are important. One of those is the 1099. That's the tax form that you have to file when you pay someone who's not an employee, so like a contractor, consultant. And it's not uncommon to see that as something agencies are concerned about when they pay people in cash, people with lived experience for their time. There's a dollar amount threshold for 1099 reporting. Again, I'm not going to quote that because I'm not a tax professional, but my advice there would be, don't use that dollar amount threshold as something that is a barrier to making payments. Because ultimately the value here is, again, paying people for their time. So, my understanding is that HUD and HHS are not counting these types of payments as reportable income. And, if we need to dig in and find guidance and stuff on that, we certainly can. Again, you can reach out to me as your regional team's point of contact. And then I see Helen put in the chat there too. That's something else I was going to mention. Tax advice is available. There are places you can get that. So that's something to take under consideration here too. Seek out that advice and figure out what the tax implications are. It's important to consider the implications both for the agency and for the person with lived experience who's being paid, and making sure that they understand what the implications could be for them as well. Also notable, some states don't count these payments toward state benefits income thresholds. That's often another area of concern. Will this income, if the person already has income, is this going to bump them above the threshold for receiving certain benefits? That is certainly a concern, but it's important to be aware of what your state rules are, because it might not count towards that in Alaska. So again, I'm not sure if it does in Alaska, but I can certainly help figure that out if we don't know already. That's all I've got on reporting. So funding sources. There's a number of ways that you can find money for this, but it should be adequately budgeted across funding sources. That's an important thing to note, especially when you're considering things like gift cards, because there are rules with what you can do with gift cards using HUD funds. But if you have multiple funding sources, then you can kind of balance the gift cards that you're using versus cash payments and stipends and things like that. So budgeting appropriately is really important, but some of the things you can consider, COC planning grant funds can absolutely be used for these types of payments. Government general funds that you might be received could potentially be used. Philanthropic dollars and individual and private donations, those are usually going to be your more flexible funds. That's where you can typically do things like gift cards and some of those more flexible payment methods that HUD funding might not let you do. So important to keep in mind that, you know, you have to budget across all of these sources to ensure that you have all of them available, like all the payment methods available in your toolbox. So yeah, you know, there's some questions there to think about. Not necessarily going to talk through these right now, but you know, when you get these slides, those are things to consider.
Can I just flag that I was reading through these slides, Michael, and realized that this slide, the content does not match the title. And we already talked through this actually above when we were talking about compensation. So we will fix this slide before we send it to you, but I actually wanted to bring up this training piece and bring Ziggy in again, because I didn't tell you that I was doing this before this call, so I apologize for that. But in thinking about training, you know, how important and critical that is, like you and I had a conversation after ICF as a whole, hired folks with lived experience and expertise in homelessness. And I think that this piece specifically came up as feedback from you around what is really necessary to ensure somebody succeeds. So it didn't have anything to do with our compensation. It had to do with this piece. Am I remembering that discussion correctly?
Yeah, pretty much. We have the slide that says all the training stuff on it if we go ahead a little bit, I think. But I could talk to it though. So like key to training, from what I remember, was that when you bring on someone with lived experience, even though that might be the marker, the sticker, the thing that like they have that other people do not, you still need to train and support them to do other things and know what they're doing. So when you hiring people with lived experience, it's great and that's what we want, but it also means that whereas other people might know, I've been brought in with this title to do this thing because I'm good at this thing. When you enter a space as a lived experience individual, I have been put in this position knowing that I have lived experience, but that doesn't always mean that you know what the transferable skills are that you need to do a task. It doesn't mean that you know what is required of you to accomplish a thing. And it doesn't mean that they don't have these skills, but there's no written rule book of, because you have lived experience, that must mean that you're great at making presentations. That must mean that you're great at public speaking. That must mean that you know the subset of things that you need to lead a conversation or to lead others with lived experience to do a thing. You might, but like that is not a prerequisite to navigating homelessness. So being mindful that when you bring in people with lived experience, that you're training them the same way that you train other staff members. You're onboarding them the same way you're onboarding others. So some of the key things through the conversation was rooted in like something like case conferencing to talk through what's happening, what are you doing, where do you fit in. It might be talking through what experiences that do you have that you're comfortable with tapping into to help lead and guide others. It might be a conversation rooted around what are things that you've done in the past, what are skills that you've used for that, to know what some of their existing skill base is, because everyone with lived experience, same with everyone else, our experiences and the things that we've done in life and jobs are different, meaning that I have really good people management skills, but that's not because of this. That's because I went to school to work with birth to grade 2, so I can manage a pre-K classroom. Does that mean that that should have been a transferable skill? No, but it means that I'm pretty engaging when I have to talk to a group of people because I'm used to entertaining toddlers. But like, is that something that everyone's gonna have? No. Is it useful? Yeah, public speaking game on point. However, like training as a whole needs to be something that's standardized in uniforms and that's adaptable. So when you're bringing on people, especially making sure that they have a buddy that like they're relatively comfortable with, whether or not they're a person with lived experience that like knows some of the tasks, but also so that they have someone to ask. I think key to training is also like having that buddy, because having someone that you can message real quick to say, hey, am I supposed to know this? And if so, where is it? Is okay if you have a peer in a space versus like if I only had the ability to ask like, I don't have a better term for like a supervisor. Like if I had to ask someone that was in charge of, you should know this, I wouldn't message that person to ask them something. You know, things like that. You want to make sure that you're setting up your people for success, but also security. And some of that is making sure that even though they have the experience, that they have someone else to like buddy up with, the same way you'd like onboard others. With I don't know. I think I hit most of the points.
No, I think you hit all the points and more, so I appreciate that. I think a couple of additional pieces that I would bring in. So this is a conversation that Ziggy and I had again after ICF, recruited and hired folks with lived experience of homelessness. And I think one of the pieces that we really talked through is the other skill sets piece, right? Because if the requisition was specifically kind of geared towards finding folks with lived experience and expertise of homelessness, it then meant that we needed to do some additional work, have some additional conversations to understand, because to your point, Zig, everybody brings in different skills and other skills beyond their lived experience and expertise of homelessness. So it's digging in to find out what those are and how to leverage them. And there isn't a crosswalk of like, well, this skill is transferable to this activity as a TA provider. Like that's not a thing that exists. It might be a good idea to have at some point in time now that I'm saying that out loud, but it's not a thing that currently exists. So doing that due diligence to figure that out and figure out how to best leverage those skill sets that go beyond the lived experience and expertise of homelessness that you also bring to the work. The other piece that I think might be specific to being a TA provider, but is also, I think rules and regulations and policies guide all of us in some way, shape, or form. So I think also there was an understanding or an expectation of like, oh, you have lived experience and expertise of homelessness, but you might not know what the COC program interim role is. Like, that's not a thing that you
For sure.
learn when you're in a shelter. So like,
Just to add a thing super quick, that's super applicable, but only because like when you're working with lived ex people, especially like in your communities, they don't know the rules that you know as someone that learned it top down, meaning that I don't know the way the CLC functions. I don't know how the homeless system is designed to work. I know how it worked for me based on my experience navigating as a whole. Like, things like that. So things that everyone in the corporation organization in the drop-in center knows as a fact on this is the chain of command. This is how this works. Those aren't things that are gonna be known to your lived ex hires, especially if there's something that's like, oh, well, you've navigated the system. Navigating the system and knowing how the system is supposed to function on paper is not the same thing. So like things like that, having some of that written out, but also like, I don't know the rules and regs as they're supposed to be written and said. I do know what people followed versus now what I know that they didn't and things. So yeah, stuff like that.
thank you. And you touched on the next slide a little bit, Michael, but we can go ahead and go to that one.
Is it me? Is it you?
I don't know.
I mean, I think that you mostly touched on this, Zig, when you talked about having somebody, because that's another piece that, again, may be specific to TA, but I think is just a human nature thing of like, I don't want to show my weaknesses, especially if I'm in a space where I don't feel like I can show that I don't know a thing. And you and I have had several conversations about that. Like, where is it safe for me to say, like, I don't know this thing? Who am I safe to like share that with? And we've talked about like who that person is or who that group of people are versus like, you might not want to share that in this space over here. So yeah.
Yeah, no, that tracks. I think we talked about this in the literal slide just before this, so we can go to the next one. Accountability structures. Michael, you want this one?
Yeah, sure.
Sweet.
Yep. So yeah, it's important to have accountability structures in place when you're doing this, because it's easy to say you're going to do the thing, but then in order to do the thing, you have to make sure that the organization and all the people involved are accountable. So some examples of that are community agreements. We've been doing that for these meetings. We've had group agreements at the very beginning that we've agreed upon. We'll kind of dictate how we operate in the meetings. And so it's important to have community agreements. That's a good example. Transparency. There should be full transparency in how these things are done. It doesn't work if people involved don't know why decisions are being made or the full extent of how they're being made. So transparency is also really important. Another example: continuous feedback loops. When you're hearing from people, it's important to make sure that that feedback is getting to where it needs to go and then causing the changes that need to happen. And then those changes are going down the line and you receive feedback on an ongoing basis. So that's an example there. And then systems change to meet PLE needs and wants. So, again, very important to have that as an accountability structure as well. Moving very fast, so I'm looking at the time and I want to make sure we have a little time for discussion. So I'm going to move on to decision-making and voting structures. So how do the various options for decision-making process and voting mechanisms ensure or possibly even impede accountability to community and shifting power? So it's just important to consider what your decision-making and voting structures look like. Is it a majority vote system, or is it based on consensus, some sort of weighted voting? Is there an override power once a decision has been made? Is there a mandatory sign-off on decisions? So all of these are important to consider, and in your system. So in any place where decisions are being made and where you're taking into account people with lived experience and their thoughts on the system, and integrating that feedback, how are those decisions actually being made? So this is kind of the mechanics of it. But again, all those things on the screen there, just consider what they look like in your systems where these decisions are being made, and if they are actually operating in a way that is equitable and effectively incorporating all the voices that need to be incorporated.
Let me just say real quickly, because somebody asked about FISTA 5 and I'm trying to find links that are really good that explains this. I love the FISTA 5 decision-making process. It gives everyone the opportunity to say, weigh in, and I think there are issues with some of the other ways of voting that kind of feel like forced a little bit. So FISTA 5 is this means I absolutely don't agree with this and I'm vetoing it. And then you go 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 5, and you have everyone vote at the same time, and you start to understand how close to making this decision are we? How much more discussion do we need to have? It's a really great method to really understand where you're at related to any given decision.
Okay. And if we have a moment at some point and we want to share that, I have the graphic pulled up too. All right, so we are at discussion. We have a last discussion question, and we probably got, what, about 4 minutes or so that we can have discussion? So,
Or 6.
or 6. Okay. So we kind of put all of these questions on one slide here, just because we wanted to encourage considering all of them at once. So it's not really just one question. So take a look at all 3 of those and consider those. And again, want to have some discussion. And then, of course, Melissa and Ziggy, if you want to jump in here too, feel free. The questions are, how can white leaders take a step back and support PLE and other diverse leaders in leading this work? What will need to change in order for that to happen? And then how will your community ensure PLE are at every decision-making table?
And if I can just toss in here for our grantees, this is the type of information we're looking for in the local competition application when we ask you about how are you prioritizing diversity, equity, and inclusion in your programming. So not how are you being non-racist and expanding beyond that to how are you prioritizing diversity and inclusion of people with lived experience.
It sounds like what you're asking, Helen, is if you were writing your application today, what would you be putting in there?
Hint, hint. And one thing that I really appreciate about working for AKCH2 is that much of our leadership has lived experience. Many of the folks that we work with who are in staffing and decision-making places within our organization, as well as within a number of our partner organizations, there is priority on making sure that those voices are centered and heard.
Okay, any thoughts on these questions?
Pauline in Nome enters in the chat. In our housing programs, we have program managers with lived experience that in many ways are the experts in the field. They are able to identify conflicts or issues that otherwise may have been overlooked. Thank you, Colleen.
I'm especially curious about, the Alaska balance of state is a very large geographically. What does this look like regionally?
Can I also just drop a resource into the chat? This was released during the spring NHSDC conference, and it's the PLEE, so Persons with Lived Experience and Expertise of Homelessness and Data Decision Making Toolkit. I think that, I'm in the data space day in and day out, and I know, and I will just say that I have recognized that space has lagged behind some of the other spaces, the youth space, the program, policy space in incorporating people with lived experience and expertise of homelessness. And I think often we've said like, well, it's because the data is technical in nature and it's analytic and all that, which is just a smokescreen to say like, it's hard because it's hard. And so this toolkit is a series of products that were put together and developed with people with lived experience of homelessness to really start to break down that barrier of the data is about the people experiencing homelessness. The data is about our systems and also who we are and are not serving. And so we need to incorporate the voices of people that our data is about to understand what the data is telling us. And if we are even collecting the right data to actually address and end homelessness. So this toolkit is really great. I think Brian was actually really excited to see it come out when it was originally released. And so it's a great starting point. I think it's a great starting point or a great topic to start to think through for actually operationalizing something like this. So just a thought. And it's a new resource, so it's fun.
Okay, we'll give like 30 seconds for someone else to pop in unless, Michael, were you gonna say something?
I think I was going to say the same thing. I was going to say we have more slides, but I'm also checking the time, and it looks like we are there.
We are there. So just to let everyone on this call know, first of all, thank you so much to those of you who have attended all 4 of these. We appreciate you hanging in there with us. Next week, there is a final webinar, one that's going to be, I believe, a little more discussion, a little more back and forth. So that one, hint, would be really good to attend if you're thinking about how you're going to answer your equity, diversion, and inclusion questions in the local application, which should be coming out in a month or so, maybe a month and a half, depending on how it's scheduled. The other thing is that the resources page has been launched on the website. So the videos to all of these discussions can be found there. The link to the mural board can be found there. We're also working on populating that page with other resources for our grantees. It's under the Learn tab, and the secondary navigation is grantee resources. So you're all welcome to pop over there and take a look at it. Please give us some grace. Know that it's a work in process. The website link is not really, what is it? Now I just clicked the button. I can't even remember our website. I'm a little bit fried apparently. Hold on a minute. Thanks, Alyssa. That's embarrassing. Like I think that's,
No, love it. And then this is the actual, I think this is the new page that you were talking about with the resources.
I believe so, yes. So are there any final questions, comments, decisions? Questions, exclamations, complaints, compliments?
Huge thanks to Ziggy for joining us today. Just always appreciate spending with them.
And big thanks to Michael, Alyssa, and Ziggy for leading us through this process again this week. We look forward to seeing everyone next week. Let us know if you have any questions or concerns. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.